and welcome to another episode of Two Sisters of a Certain Age, Conversations with a Therapist
and a Doctor.
I'm your co-host, Judy Grant, licensed marriage and family therapist.
And I'm your co-host, Dr. Sophia Grant, board-certified pediatrician and board-certified child abuse pediatrician.
All right. So, Candy, another episode.
Yes,
so glad to be with everybody. So I want to share a little bit about some purging that I did. You know I love to get rid of stuff.
Oh my gosh, Judy loves to purge.
I love to purge.
But not in the horror movie way. Just like get
rid of stuff. If it's been around for too long, I just get rid of it. So I was looking in my closet thinking I need to purge because there are things in there that have been there for years that I have not worn, will not wear again, can't fit into. Why am I holding on to these things? So it was just kind of a nice cleansing for me to take those things out and know that I can, donate those to some cause for people who are in need.
Yeah, no, that's fabulous. I constantly have a bag going for Goodwill. But the last time I did that, my girl said, don't throw anything away. I want to see what and then they shopped and then I was able to get rid of it. So,
yeah.
Anyway, today I've been wanting to get Dr. Nicole Washington on the podcast for a while. And let's go back, 19 years, 18 years. I met Nicole because when I moved to Oklahoma to start my fellowship, her husband was my realtor. And because I didn't want to move into any type of crazy neighborhood, I chose a Black realtor because I know he wasn't going to put me anyplace crazy. So Kamara got me into our house, and Nicole had just had her baby. And she was finishing up residency. And that's how far back this goes.
Candy, I remember you telling me about this realtor. I remember the stories. Yeah.
So this is how far back it goes. And it goes so far back that Boogie, he was older enough than her son that baby Kamara got some of Boogie's hand-me-downs. Now nobody can fit into Boogie stuff because he's still the same size he was as when he was 6.
Right. Now just like 6'1".
I know. Yeah. So, but I am thrilled to have Dr. Nicole Washington on. She has a podcast called The Black Woman's Confidant, and she has her own private practice called Elosin Psychiatric Services. And she treats and cares for high achieving people. And I just want to talk about why did you feel the need for that market?
Sophia, when I first got out of residency, my population was severely mentally ill people with psychosis. I did home visits for 7 years for people with severe mental illness.
I remember that.
Yes. And then I ran a crisis unit. And somewhere along the way, I think I didn't have enough to do in all my free time. And I started a master's program in public health with an emphasis in policy and administration. And I was like, I'm going to run something. I surely can do this better than some of the people that I see running these things. I'm going to do it. And in working on that master's, I really got drawn into the physician mental health crisis. And that was where things took a big turn for me, because then I realized, it's not just physicians. It's a lot of high achieving professions. And I specifically was focused on Black women because it feels like nobody else in the world is specifically focused on Black women.
Yeah.
And I realized very quickly that we are, as a group, the higher we get up into whatever career field it is that we're in, the more lonely we are, the more we suffer, the more we deal with the hierarchies at home and in our personal relationships and at work. And that does a lot to your mental health. And I realized that, a lot of us are out here suffering.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I'm not saying I'm at the top, but it is lonely at the top when you find yourself maybe in a high position, but there's nobody who looks like you and nobody can relate to your issues. And then if you do complain, they say, but you're making so much money, you have everything is
Mhm.
great. And so a lot of people, especially women, we're forced to wear a mask that everything is okay. And sometimes it's very not okay.
Absolutely. And sometimes we feel like we have to do the most. Like we
Hmm.
do the most. We do the most in every setting. We do it in
Yeah.
our
Mhm.
personal lives.
Mhm.
We do it at work. Like we end up being the moms at work, the moms
Hmm.
at home. I talked to a doctor recently who's like, "Oh yeah, I'm heading off." It was an early morning visit, a surgeon getting ready to go do a case, but had to go stop and pick up a cake because it was the scrub tech's birthday. And I was like,
Hmm.
why are you planning birthday parties even at work? I mean, this is crazy. You are stressed to the max. You're doing
Yeah.
more than your peers. You're on all these extra
Mhm.
committees. Oh, and I'm picking up a cake so that I
Yeah.
can help be coordinating the scrub tech's birthday, which is nice.
Hmm.
But we are always the ones who are taking on all that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I,
But
I,
Candy, you
I
do
think
that.
I
You
know.
you do
I,
that.
I
You're
just
getting
made
cakes.
I
You
just made a cake for my staff last week.
yes.
And you know what? The thing is, when Yaya left for college and I had nobody to care for, I started bringing stuff to work.
Okay.
And
Mhm.
I didn't realize I was kind of nurturing the people at work because I didn't have anybody at home. And finally, one of the social workers said to me, Dr. Grant, you miss your baby, don't you? I said, I do. And she said, I can tell because you're trying to take care of us like we're kids. And then I was like, oh my gosh. So I backed off on the baking, but I still, it doesn't feel compulsive anymore. It just feels like, oh, they liked my guava cake last time. Let me do that. Let me do
Right.
that.
Right.
So,
But that feels different because
yeah.
you don't have a family at home. But
Uh-huh.
think about back when you still were trying to juggle all the kid
Right.
stuff
Yes.
and you
Right.
still had all the activities and all the stuff to do. But and then on top of that, you
Yeah.
had to think, oh, so and so's wife is having a baby. Let's throw a baby shower. Oh, so
Yeah.
and so had this thing. I'm collecting money so we can send a
Yeah.
flower because so and so's mom died because
Yeah.
Mhm.
your male counterparts don't think like that.
Oh
Right.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think there's putting the mask on, suffering in silence, putting on that good face, and also there's a need to look like we've always got it together, you know? And
Hmm.
that then becomes problematic for any number of reasons. But we I think a lot of us try to present like we got it all going on and that everything is
Yeah.
perfect. And it's, you know, hopefully you have a support network around you where you can say, okay, this shit's going sideways, and you can be
Yeah.
honest about what's going on in your life. um but it's hard. It can be very hard to do it, and you feel very vulnerable when you do it,
Mm-hmm.
and you might feel less than or not
Mm-hmm.
worthy and all of these other things, and you start to second guess yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And it becomes this sort of vicious pattern of thinking.
Yeah, it I think we do always feel like we have to put forth our best front, our best selves. Our grandparents, our parents, you were always told like you don't let them see you sweat. You better not cry
Hmm.
in front of those people. You better
Mm-hmm.
you better
Mm-hmm.
you better wait until you get home. You better not.
Right.
And
Right.
and honestly, being vulnerable in the workplace is 100% not going to work out in our favor most of the time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right. You have to have that circle. You have to have that safe place for you where you can lose it and be vulnerable. I think that's what helps you be able to continue to put forth that good face
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
when
Mm-hmm.
you're at work. You have to
Mm-hmm.
have your friends. You have to have that circle.
Yeah. We did my divorce episode a few months ago and I shared it with a friend and she reached out to me and she said, Soph, I had no idea you were in that much pain. And she said, I always seemed like I had it together. And so she didn't think I needed the support as much as I did. And she's not the only person to tell me that. And Judy, you know I didn't have it together. And you knew I was struggling. But let's talk about depression, because for a time, I was like, I was on antidepressants. And I just, like, when I kind of got over that hump, I didn't need the medication anymore. But talk to us a little bit about situational depression. Like in California, we had the wildfires. You might lose a spouse, lose a child, versus kind of a more chronic condition. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and I think that's tough because a lot of people say to me, well, everybody's depressed sometimes, right? Like bad stuff happens, you lose somebody. And then my answer is always no. Everybody doesn't experience depression because I do see those as very different things. I think we need to get very comfortable saying sometimes you just are sad. Sometimes bad stuff happens and you have a normal human response to this bad thing happening. So I do turn people away sometimes. They come to me and they're like, I need medicine because this very bad thing happened and I'm just really down. And I'm like, you need therapy. You need a therapist. You need to work through this. It's uncomfortable. It's unpleasant. It doesn't feel good, but that just means you're alive. I don't know what to tell you. If you are dealing with a bad circumstance and you are feeling down, maybe you don't need medicine, but it is very possible that a big stressful life event can tip you over into a depression where you do start to lose that ability to enjoy life. You can't feel happy if you wanted to. You don't have the ability to do something that you used to enjoy and say, oh, this is pleasant. It's more like, to quote Marshawn Lynch, I'm here so I don't get fined. It's more along the lines of I'm here so my family, my loved ones don't get on me for not being here. I'm here because it's more stressful for me to just not show up, which is what I want to do, but that's more stressful than if I just go through the motions and fake it. And then you don't have to open up. Yeah, if you're unable to find the motivation to do the stuff that you normally do. So if your place is normally clean and then all of a sudden you find that your place isn't clean because on your days off, it is you are barely able to get up and brush your teeth and put clothes on, and maybe you can't do that. So you're not doing those things that you normally do, like make sure the dishes are put away, make sure the laundry is put away. That's when I think, okay, maybe we need to start thinking about depression and we can start thinking about medication, therapy, combo, what that looks like. But I don't like that we sometimes jump to depression first when it could just be that you're a normal human who just feels normal human things.
Yeah, there's a huge difference between clinical depression and being sad or stressed because of this event, this circumstance.
Yeah, but people are uncomfortable feeling unpleasant things. Like they're just uncomfortable being sad or frustrated or angry sometimes. Like people are uncomfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah, but also, in regards to actual clinical depression, there's still a stigma. We know that there's a stigma around all things mental health. And if it's not like a physical cut, people are like, it's in your head. Don't worry about it. It'll go away. Just exercise more. And we need to be able to remove that stigma from mental health and let people know that when you're truly suffering from clinical depression, there are steps that you can take. And it's just like having a diagnosis of, diabetes. You take care of that with medication. This is your mental health, and we can take care of that with medications as well. So people need to recognize that a mental health diagnosis is just as valid as a medical.
Yeah. And I think we have done that. we created this system where we refer to it as behavioral health. We separated it from the body. We completely separated it from being a medical disorder. So we said, oh, behavioral health, which kind of implies that it's a behavior and you have control over it.
Yeah.
And you can do something about it.
Right.
I like to think of them as brain health disorders, no different than a cardiovascular system disorder or, an endocrine system disorder with diabetes.
I actually really like that. Brain health. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, we have to, because I think that we have done it a huge misjustice by saying, we've done a huge injustice by saying, oh, this is your mental health, your behavioral health. It's different than your physical body health. It's a whole different thing. We carve it out in every aspect of our care, and it just doesn't make sense.
But and the reality is they're all interconnected, right? It's like, okay, if I'm feeling this way, then I'm unable to maintain my physical health or eat. So the connection there is real. And hopefully you have like a support team of your therapist, your psychiatrist, your physician, your primary care to understand all aspects of you and to look at you holistically as opposed to just this one little piece.
Yeah, you absolutely need a team.
Tell me something. Judy and I, we spoke with a woman earlier this past week who had a medical condition, but she's also a woman of a certain age. And her doctors told her she was depressed rather than treat the medical condition. How, if any way, does the mental health change during menopause, during perimenopause?
Yeah. Most of my patients are in that perimenopausal phase of life, and a lot of my practice is women's health, and I do have a lot of perimenopausal women I'm seeing right now. I think the problem with that time of life is nobody knows what they're doing. I talk to my friends who are OB-GYNs, and they admittedly say, you know what, we don't learn a lot about perimenopause. It's kind of this woo-woo time, and because we don't have firm, like we can draw this lab and say with certainty, oh, you're perimenopausal. We don't have that wand available to us to wave it and go, yep, that's what we're dealing with. So then women get stuck into this, oh, you're just anxious, or maybe you're depressed, or maybe it's a mental health thing. You should go get a therapist. You should go see a psychiatrist. And not to say that mental health medications can't help during that time of life. But I do think we do a disservice when we start poo-pooing women with their symptoms, like, oh, you're just a hysterical woman and it's probably not your hormones, you'll be fine. And I don't know what it's going to take to change that. I mean, I can say that in my 20s as a doctor and in my early 30s, I probably didn't appreciate what women this age were going through. I know I didn't.
Did not.
Now that I'm here and my body betrays me on a regular basis every day, every day is a new day. Every day is something different. And it's always little stuff that I know as a doctor, nobody's going to be able to tell me why this month my body did this versus the next month. I know that. But I have a lot more empathy and I definitely am a lot different with my patients in this age group than I was in my 20s and early 30s. I had no frame of reference because nobody ever taught me about mental health in this perimenopausal period. I just didn't know.
I'm thinking about like when we're in middle school, high school, and we're doing our sex ed, sexual health classes, right?
Yes.
And they're talking to us about puberty and, safe sex and all of those things. But there's no education around perimenopause and menopause.
No.
We just
and it's not something our moms talk to us about.
No. And to tell you the truth, there wasn't much conversation about that in medical school either.
No.
It's just like, I think back to my, OB rotation, it's birth control, delivering babies, hysterectomies, fibroids, STIs, but nothing about menopause and perimenopause and the changes. I have had some friends become very anxious during that menopausal period to the point where they're like, am I losing my mind? Now, when patients come to you with those complaints, what do? Do you go back and say, draw hormone levels, or how do you approach that?
In that perimenopausal phase, hormone levels may not tell you anything. You may check them one day and they're perfectly within normal range and nothing looks out of whack. You may check them another time and they look out of range. That's not necessarily a helpful marker.
Really?
It's checking hormones. So the OB-GYNs will say, well, why are we checking? I mean, their motto is treat the symptoms, treat the patient, not the lab values. But there are still a lot of gynecologists out there who are not comfortable they're just not comfortable in doing that. They're not comfortable in this space. And so now we're seeing a range of time where we have gynecologists who are now moving into this menopause practice. This is what they do. I have a really close friend who it has a menopause practice. That is her now focus as a gynecologist, is to help women transition through this perimenopause, menopausal time of life without losing their mind. And without having to go through it with no support, because it is very defeating when you go to your doctor and your doctor's like, okay, well, nothing's wrong. I can't see anything in labs. Go see the psychiatrist. That is just also not the answer. So we are seeing that shift, and we are seeing gynecologists jump out there and make that their primary practice. So I love that. I love that. As a perimenopausal woman, I especially love that because I could see how you would feel like you're going crazy.
Let me ask you.
Yes, and hold on, Judy. I just want to shout out former guest, Dr. Suzanne Gilbert-Lenz. We did an episode called Menopause Boot Camp, and that's what she does. And she has started a private practice now exclusively for menopause care. So,
yeah.
Judy?
So I was going to ask, and clearly I know when Suzanne made that shift, she's doing it now when she herself is in the midst of her menopausal journey. Dr. Nicole, did this friend that you're mentioning also make that shift when she was finding herself symptomatic in that way?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's like, because we have this newfound empathy and understanding. Like, we need to help these women.
Absolutely. And for her, it also became very relevant that it became very apparent to her that in my day-to-day practice as a gynecologist in our current system, the way medicine is delivered right now, I don't even have the time to talk to my patients about menopause, perimenopause. It takes time. It takes like therapy appointments. It takes time to go through that stuff. And most of our colleagues don't have that kind of time. When you're in a primary care field, whether it's family medicine, internal medicine, gynecology, I mean, they are back to back 15 minutes. That's not long enough to check in on all the stuff and do the counseling that it takes and ask the questions to really figure out what's going on with your patients. So these menopause docs who are now emerging, they have that time. Their schedules are different. The way they practice is different. They're also not doing the general gynecology stuff most of the time. They're just serving in this role. So the patient may have them plus the general gynecologist to do all the paps and pelvics and deal with all that part, the knock it out part. But they still have that space where they can get the counseling done, have the conversations with the experts, get what they need to get done. So it'll be interesting to see over the next 5-10 years, like what happens for us women in this age group, because largely in medicine, I feel like, especially when it comes to women's health, we were just left out of the equation. Nobody cared about women once they couldn't have kids anymore. We were just like, go off and have hot flashes and go through menopause and go ahead and die, because you don't serve us any purpose anymore. And I think now we're realizing, the 60-year-olds of today are not the 60-year-olds of 30 years ago. We're still dynamic and active, and we're still participating in the world and the economy, and we deserve to be addressed.
I heard recently that there are 3 mammals that go through menopause: humans, elephants, and gorillas. And they say the purpose, and that men die earlier than we do. And the purpose of this phase of life, like, why would a gorilla or an elephant need to go through menopause? Well, they need to be available to teach the younger ones. You know, we
Yeah.
still have value
Yeah.
as a woman who is not childbearing. There's
Yes.
still, think of everything that you've learned from
Yes.
people who weren't having kids. Just the matriarch. There's
Yes.
just passing
Right,
down of
right.
traditions of look how much we still call mommy and ask her about things, you know, at her
Yes.
85-year-old self.
Right.
You know? So I think there's definitely value in that. Now, I want to talk about sometimes certain things can be triggers for undiagnosed mental health conditions. Like, you know, the person who is, you know, in college and something happens and bam, they have a manic episode.
Yeah.
Yeah. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Illnesses like bipolar disorder and schizophrenia are so frustrating for the
Mhm.
families, the person who's dealing with them, because a lot of times they don't show themselves until that late
Yeah.
teens, early 20s phase. That's when they show up. And we don't know why all of a sudden those genes are expressed at that time. We still don't know. We have no idea why a child can go through life and have all these plans for their future. And I'm going to go to medical school and I'm going to be a doctor. And then they get to that first semester of medical school and have that first manic episode. And suddenly everyone questions, oh my gosh, what's going to happen for this person going forward? We don't know. We don't know why that happens, but we know that that's a ripe time. I do think some of it is the fact that a stressor can turn those genes on, so to speak. And when you first get to college and you are not under your parents' thumb anymore, and nobody's telling you to go to bed at a certain time, so maybe you're not getting as much sleep as you normally get. Maybe you're out partying and experimenting with substances
Drugs.
for the first time. And that, I think, can be a thing that can turn that on. And so it's not uncommon for me to see it, especially during that first test block, that first finals exam test block, when there's not as much sleep happening, burning the candle at both ends, and the system is like, oh, this doesn't feel right. And that'll kind of switch it on. We see marijuana a lot doing that. And so I'm always telling any young person who will listen to me, please, 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 if you must, wait until your little frontal lobe is developed. Can you at least hold out to 25 at least? Can we just hold out if you feel like you must? Because we know that marijuana and psychosis have a very tight link, especially at those early ages. And we know that cannabis of today is more potent than the cannabis of the 70s when our parents were, you know, smoking and enjoying it recreationally. What we have today is it's not the same.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. So what would you say to a family who sends their kid off to school and they get a phone call in November saying, you know, from a roommate saying, your son isn't right, your daughter's not right, and you go and you pick up your kid and it's somebody you don't recognize? What would you say? What would be the next step? Do you medicate? Do you hospitalize? Do you pray? What do you do?
We're always praying. Praying is always happening. That is always happening.
But
I would
prayer,
say take
you can't
them.
just pray.
No, you can't just pray. We cannot pray the bipolar away. We cannot pray the psychosis away. We cannot pray any of those things away. I say get evaluated. If you're concerned about safety and you don't feel like you can keep this person safe, and honestly, in a lot of these states, these manic states, they're so impulsive and their thoughts are going 90 to nothing and they think they can do anything.
Everything, yeah.
So evaluation to see if they're safe enough to not be admitted, I would say is the first step. And just be open. I think it's a scary time, and a lot of people are trying to figure out, like, what is this? What could this be? Just be open to all the things, right? Be open to the fact that your kid may be using drugs. Maybe that's what set this off. Let's be open to all the possibilities that this could be. Maybe you have a family history. Maybe you don't. Doesn't mean that your kid could not have bipolar disorder. Some of us have family histories that we don't know about because we didn't talk about it. We had that weird uncle or that weird auntie who sometimes they came around and they were dressed weird and they were talking fast and everybody ignored them. And then we'd see them again and they were okay. And we were like, weird Aunt so-and-so just had her moments. Maybe weird Aunt so-and-so had bipolar disorder. Maybe weird Uncle Joe had schizophrenia and we just didn't talk about it. So we don't always know the full stories about our family histories, but I would say take your kid for an evaluation and be open to the idea that there is something going on that isn't right, and be comforted in the fact that the earlier we can get them into whatever treatment they need, the better off their long-term success with a disorder will be. If a person has their first psychotic episode of schizophrenia at 18 or their first bipolar episode at 18, they are going to have so much better outcome 20 years into the future if we can get them on meds and stable early instead of doing the off and on meds, in and out of the hospital episode after episode. Like, they're just going to do so much better the earlier we can get them stable and in treatment. And so just, I would say, feel some comfort in that fact, and that's where you put your energy.
Right.
Now, one of my thoughts about medication, whether it's bipolar, schizophrenia, depression, et cetera, is that you often, I've seen where people are like, well, I started taking so-and-so, but I feel fine. I don't think I need that anymore. And will take themselves off of those meds only to then relapse later. And it's kind of going back to the idea of a diagnosis is a diagnosis, whether it's, brain health or physical health, because the truth is a diabetic is always going to need to take their medication. So if you are diagnosed with a brain health issue, you still need to remember that, I feel good, but I still need to take my meds, because if I don't, I could spiral down, I could have an episode, this, that, or the other. So just, reminding people to stay on their medication. I think that is.
I think that is 100%. That's the key is to get on it. And once you're stable, and especially for illnesses like bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, those are ones that we are typically saying lifelong medication. That's typically our recommendation. For something like a major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, first time around, we'll tell you, let's get on the medicine, let's get you feeling better. Then the clock starts ticking. Then you're going to be working with your therapist, because we know that sometimes, especially for depression and anxiety, the medicine increases the capacity for what you can actually do in therapy. So you go put the work in therapy.
Yes.
And then after 6 months to a year, first time around, we can have a discussion about coming off the antidepressant. We can talk about it, and we can see. And some people will go, never need it again. And some people may go very long period with no episode. Maybe something stressful happens. Maybe they just have a random episode. But some people's symptoms come back very quickly. And those are the ones we have the conversation of, maybe we should just stick here. Maybe we shouldn't keep trying to go off. I don't think there's anything wrong with trying to go off if you have anxiety or a major depressive disorder. I think trying is reasonable if you've seen significant improvement and you've put the work in therapy.
Right.
But, I think it's important. The key part really is, don't go off the medicine without discussing it with the person who's prescribing it. Because then you can have this conversation of, well, we can try that. Let's taper slow. Or no, I don't think it's a great idea, and this is why. And then we can talk through it.
Right. Let me ask you about brain health and COVID-19. As it felt like the levels of anxiety and depression skyrocketed as a result of that. You're taking these kids who are engaged socially at school with their friends, blah, 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 blah. Now you're isolating them for years. And I witnessed it in my own home. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, what you saw and how,
Yeah, it was a lot. I mean, I think my own kids were 8th grade and a senior in high school when this happened. And so the 8th grader I've seen, I've watched, she did fine. But I noticed that socially, once kind of she integrated back into things, I think I could tell that she wasn't as comfortable in certain situations because she had been kind of pulled out at that pivotal time. I dealt with the mood fluctuations in the oldest, because here he was a senior and wasn't going to get prom, and was he going to have a graduation, and was he, going to get to go off to college, and what was he going to do, and all of the uncertainty and the unknowns, it was tough to watch it play out kind of in your house. And with my patients, it was hard because people were struggling. People who really need people who were isolated or single, it was so hard on people who just were isolated. It was social isolation was, I think, the biggest thing that I saw people struggle with. And I think we completely underestimate the value that community has in our lives. Like we just don't get it. We completely underestimate it.
And I think there are going to be long-lasting effects of that. We won't know about it, for another 20-something years when people do the research. But I think, we shouldn't dismiss, the impact of COVID on our mental well-being.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I also think we should also take a pointed effort to talk about the positives that came out of COVID for our mental health. So I do think there were some positives. I think it taught us that we don't have to have people in our immediate proximity to be able to connect. It taught us that we don't need that. Some people just don't have that. I think we've learned that family is who you make it. It may not be necessarily the people that are right next to you all the time. I think that's something we learned. I also think we learned that we don't have to run ourselves into the ground as much as we have been trained to think that we needed to run ourselves into the ground. I have seen lots of people in holidays since COVID say, you know what, I'm just not going to let the holidays take me down. We didn't see anybody during 2020 and 2021 for Christmas, and we still had a really great holiday season, and we still connected. Like, I'm not going back to being so busy that I can't enjoy the things that are in front of me. So I do think there are some positives we can pull from it, but I do think you're right. It's going to be a decade or two from now before we really know what number COVID did on us mentally as a society.
Right.
My COVID experience was Yaya was in high school. Boogie was a senior in college, and Haley was an independent woman living in New York. And Boogie had to come home early. Haley flew from New York. And let me tell you something, and I feel like a jerk saying it. I was the happiest I was because I knew this was probably going to be the last time all three of my kids were under the same roof with me for an extended period of time. So I felt like I had a chance to really savor my children and savor that time and really enjoy the girls doing the TikTok dances and coming together. It was a blessing for me. I still had to go to work and still disrobe in the garage and all of that stuff when I came home. But I love that extra time with my kids.
Yeah, I mean, as much as I know that the pandemic has affected them in different ways, it was the best time in our house. My family of four was the closest that we've ever been. And it was at a time where they were getting older. And I really think that has helped my husband and I still have great relationships with our kids now that they're young adults. Because we were so close. We were cooking meals together. We were doing we were doing dupes for our favorite restaurants that we couldn't go to. We were working out together. We were doing meditation sessions.
It was, and I mean, what a blessing, because some people didn't have that luxury, but I really loved that time. And I loved that. Well, my Haley, she called me from New York because she was hearing all the sirens and everything. And she said, Mommy, can I come home? Like, you don't have to ask me if you can come home. Home is home. And she came and she quarantined for a little bit. But it was a really special time in my life. That probably won't ever happen again.
Yeah, I agree. And I do also recognize that comes from a huge place of privilege because there are people who don't have the kind of people in their home and support that makes that kind of closeness a pleasant experience. Like I get that comes from a place of privilege, but I am immensely grateful for the time that I got to spend with my family in that way.
So how do you see the rise of social media affecting people's mental health and this kind of comparison thing that people do so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The FOMO is real.
Yeah.
The people of this FOMO, it is real. I wish, honestly, that in high school, this is my dream. If somebody would listen to me who makes decisions about education in our country, I think in high school, because social media isn't going anywhere, we should teach, and maybe even middle school, we should teach children how to maneuver social media. Kind of like how in medicine, Sophia, we would learn how to look at a study, right? And you would learn to look at it and you'd look at, okay, what kind of study is it? How many people is it looking at? Is it a weak study? Is it a strong study? Like, you read an article, you're going to look for those little things to tell you, like, if it's a study that, studied 5 people.
Blind?
If it studied 5 people, you're like, this doesn't tell me a lot, right? But if it's thousands of people, you're like, oh, maybe this might be of value for me to look at. I think that we should approach social media the exact same way with like middle school, high school age kids, because I think they need to be able to know some of the things behind it. Like they should know the psychology behind social media. They should know that social media isn't a real system. That's not real. Your algorithm isn't real. It's not a representation of the world. It's a representation of other people who think like you or who like the same things you like. It's not, people don't typically put forth all the bad things that happen to them unless they're really going through something or have raging personality disorders. Most of us are putting our best selves out. Like I think we need to teach kids early on that this is not real life. It's not real life.
Yeah.
And they need to understand how it works and all the things that social media does to pull you in with the likes and telling you when you get likes and letting you know how many likes. Like they need to understand that, because I think that would help with the FOMO, the people getting so hung up in
and the internalizing.
All that stuff. I think that it's just because we don't understand, we don't understand how does social media really work.
Right. I mean, there's so many aspects to it. The likes, they went to a party, they went to Disneyland, I didn't get to go. Now, how does that reflect on me? But then there's the really shady side of it that can be very nasty, whether it's predators or cyberbullying. And
the trolling,
the trolling, the impact of that on our youth. Actually, this past semester, some of my students did a project on, educating our young kids about social media. And I'm like, this is so on point, because they need to know how to navigate. Parents need to understand it. They need to monitor but I fear that it is creating a society of, the Joneses, what the Joneses have, and trying to compete with that.
Yes. And you feel bad about yourself because you're like, well, I'm a psychiatrist. I can't afford, look what she's doing. I can't afford that on a psychiatrist salary. How is she doing all this stuff?
Yeah.
And you have no idea about the back system.
You
don't know. You don't know.
No.
I see stuff. I see like physicians traveling on these exotic trips, and I'm like, they must be a neurosurgeon, because my little pediatrician change can't cover this,
Right. It's hard not to compare yourself. It's really hard not to compare yourself to these other people. You're like, look at their kids. Their kids are doing this. What's my kid doing? Like, it's so hard not to compare yourself. And then all this stuff will start creeping in about, do I belong here? Am I this or that? And then people start going to their therapist saying, I have imposter syndrome, which is a whole nother issue. But
what's your take on imposter syndrome? Because I have often wondered if men have imposter syndrome, because it's in this patriarchal world, men feel entitled to the positions and women's bodies and the jobs. And do men get it? Is it more prominent with Black women? Because when I got my job, I'm like, okay, let me fake it till I make it.
Yes.
Like I felt like I'm not qualified.
100%. Yeah, I did a TED talk on
Yes,
imposter
in
syndrome,
South
and
Africa.
I did.
Yeah,
It was
yeah, I
an
remember
amazing
watching that.
experience, amazing.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, it is mostly women. It is going to be mostly seen in women, people of color. But my thought is it's an environmental issue. So, I mean, imposter syndrome was something from the 70s. You had these
Hmm.
two women researchers, and they were like, oh, we're going to research this thing. And they researched women who were back then in the 70s at the top of their game, higher up in academic departments, running companies, things like that. And these women had this sense of like not belonging or being a failure or fraud, or they would be found out. But when I think about it, if you were a woman in the 70s in academia, rising up in a department, or you were rising to the C-suite level of a company in the 70s, I am
You were
imagining people
qualified.
probably flat out told you that you didn't belong.
Uh-huh.
Whether you were
Hmm.
qualified or not, I am sure
Hmm.
that people said to you, you don't belong here. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
they had to have said that.
Right.
I can't imagine men in the 70s were like, yes, ladies, come on, infiltrate our system.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
These women caught it. If they
Hmm.
were trying to get pregnant and have families, they were poo-pooed on. Heck,
Hmm.
it wasn't even in the 70s, but when I was a medical student, I was pregnant, and I heard an attending talk about how he thought that medical students shouldn't be getting pregnant. If you want to go
Oh
into
my
medicine,
gosh.
you shouldn't be having kids and being pregnant while you were
Wow.
a medical student. I mean, that is the thought. So my thought is we are out here trying to function in environments that are not meant for us to be successful. Medicine is not meant for us to be successful. It's meant for married white men who have stay-at-home wives at home to be able to take care of all the stuff. I mean, that's who
Yeah.
it's for. It wasn't for
Yeah.
us. So how are we supposed to feel like we belong when our environments all but say you don't
Right.
belong? Now they may not say
Right.
it directly anymore because they can't for fear of an EEOC complaint going through, but by sheer nature of the fact that we get up to these levels, and you look around in your faculty meetings and how many other Black women, Black doctors do you see? If you're fortunate enough to work in a diverse setting, great. But I've never been in a setting as a doctor where I was in a faculty meeting or in an admin meeting and there was another person in that room who looked like me. I mean, how do you not feel like you don't belong somewhere when there's
Hmm.
nobody else like you there?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just kind of hard not to feel that way. And then when your systems don't have stuff in place to help you feel involved, I mean, you can say, oh, yeah, we have a Black doctor. Look here. I mean, the diversity is great, but I mean, if you don't include the other parts, if you don't include them,
Right.
if you don't do the stuff that people need to be successful, to diversify your faculty or diversify your treatment team or what that looks like, I mean, I don't know how you expect people not to feel like maybe they don't belong there.
Right. And a lot of people will hire the woman, the person with
Mm-hmm.
disability, but then they don't have things in place to keep them happy
Yeah,
when they're there.
Right.
You
exactly.
know,
They can't
like
retain them.
if you
Yes.
say, let's hire somebody transgender, and then you live in an area where people are uncomfortable and you don't have a neutral bathroom.
Right.
Like I've heard of people who
Right.
are transgender holding their urine all
Yeah.
day long and getting UTIs because they're not comfortable
Yeah.
using the bathroom.
Yeah, or having to get in the
So,
car and drive to the
uh-huh.
drive to the gas station down the street, or
Right.
Or
having to,
yeah,
like
or
strange. Yes.
we support mothers and there's no place for you to pump after you return to
Yes.
work.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So I think it is more of an environmental issue. I do think that there are
Mhm.
probably some people who would deal with that feeling of being an imposter even though they were doing well, but I do
Mhm.
think that the environment plays a lot larger part than we want
Mhm.
to admit. Because it's easy for, I think, our systems to say, you know what, you're suffering with imposter syndrome. You should probably go see somebody and work through
Mhm.
that, instead of saying, you know what, we haven't created an environment of inclusion,
Mhm.
and we
Right.
haven't created a space that would make everyone who works here feel comfortable. Maybe we should work on that. It's just easier to
Mhm.
point the finger to the person.
That's a good point, because when I think of adverse childhood experiences and how people will have issues later on, and then they don't understand that the trauma that led to them
Yeah.
being this
Yes.
way and feeling this way.
Yeah.
Wow.
And because
Okay.
and especially with ACEs, how often do we feel so sorry and we have so much compassion for kids, And then the day they turn 18, we're like, you're an adult now. I don't know why you're acting like this. You should really be able to figure this out. And it's like, it's like, do you understand that the adults that we see who are the most problematic, I can almost guarantee they had some kind of trauma that they dealt with as a kid, and it doesn't go away. We just don't have as much empathy for it once they become adults.
Right. Now, I have a question for you, and this is an opinion I have shared. What do you think about the diagnosis of oppositional defiant disorder? I don't think it's real. I think it's a label given to people who've experienced trauma and the trauma has not been addressed. And I think it's a diagnosis that's given to people of color.
I agree.
Rather than their white counterparts.
I agree.
Am I the only one?
Nope.
Okay.
And there are a lot of us who feel that way. There are a lot of us who feel like this ODD diagnosis is being weaponized against little Black kids without giving them the full step back and let's look and see what your whole history entails. I think we're just not doing that. We're just like, that kid right there, that's like, a bad one.
What's your grief history? What's is your mother in jail? Is your father dead?
Right.
What's home like? Are you getting sleep? Do you have food? Like, what's going on?
Yeah.
Right. But I think people will jump to an ODD diagnosis not considering the ACE. Like, my agency, every intake, an ACE is done with a client. So from the jump, you kind of understand where this kid's coming from. But I think if people took more time to do that, to kind of understand what their history was, they might have a better understanding of what this kid is going through now and why they might be acting out.
I actually think we should do it with adults too, though, because we just said,
I love
doesn't
the
go
ACE.
away. Like once they're 30 and 40, we still need to know what their ACEs score was, because we know we have the data on what a high ACEs score does to you as an adult. We know.
No, I love doing the ACE and just educating people around that, because it's there's so much that can be learned from that quick little exercise. Yeah. Wow. Well, Dr. Nicole, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to have you and to tap into your expertise and your vast wealth of knowledge around these issues. So just so grateful to have you and to be able to talk about some of these issues.
Nicole, how many licenses do you have? Is it 21?
It is
She has
21.
I counted last night. Nicole has medical licenses in 21 states. And she's not running away from the law. This is so she can provide medical care to people in all of those states. Telehealth is great, but you can't be in, Connecticut and giving medical care. So that's what Nicole proactively did, so she can take care of people, all across the country. So if they want to reach you, what can they do?
They can go to my website, drnicolepsych.com. They can get all the information they need on that site. And I specifically did that because what I know is that when you're a recognizable figure in your community, sometimes because stigma is real, the last thing you want is to be seen in a psychiatrist's office.
Right.
You don't want to be seen. You would prefer to get that treatment in private. We know that, my gosh, like maybe 4% of psychiatrists are Black. And sometimes when you want your psychiatric care to come from someone who looks like you, it's hard to find depending on where you are in your area. And so that's why I am pretty proactive about securing licenses and in areas where I know people are in need.
That's wonderful. Now, you named your practice Elosin. What does that mean?
I pulled an Oprah. I did my name spelled backwards. I did Nicole backwards. I pulled an Oprah.
I was like, what? You know what? I was like, what? I'm looking that up. Is that some? What does that mean?
I pulled an Oprah. I pulled an Oprah.
as
That's
much
awesome.
as I love words and word games, it never dawned on me
Listen,
to do that.
that makes sense. Love that.
Okay. I love it. I love it.
Yeah,
I love
I
it.
pulled an Oprah, so yeah.
I'm gonna see what I can do with Judy. Not quite
Yeah,
as
mine is IPIS. Yeah, that's funny. Okay, well, thank you so much. And it was so great seeing you and
Yes.
sharing your expertise. And thank you. I know you're really busy. Wait, your podcast name is The Black Woman's Confidant?
Yes.
And
The
you're
Black Woman's
available on
Confidant.
all podcast
Yes.
platforms.
Yes. And she's a work in progress. She's she's a work in progress. When I initially started the podcast, it had a different name. And I wasn't I wasn't comfortable with the direction it was going. So we did a whole rebrand to the Black Woman's Confidant because it was important to me that people looked at the name and knew who I was talking to.
Yeah.
And there was no question about who the podcast was for. So yeah, absolutely. Check it out. Check it out.
Yes, we
Absolutely,
will.
we will.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Two Soka, Two Sisters of a Certain Age with Dr. Nicole Washington. Feel free to find us at twosokapodcast@gmail.com, Two Soka Podcast on Instagram and on Facebook and all the podcast platforms and on YouTube under Two Soka.
Thank you for joining us. See you next time.
Thank you for having us.
No Longer Network.